All right, guys, welcome back to the 1% podcast with Garrett and Sean. As mentioned, we have a very special guest today, a real treat with us, a knowledgeable baseball aficionado, Mr. Coach Hallmark from the University of Texas, San Antonio. Hey, Coach.
Hey.
Garrett, Sean, how you doing?
Doing good.
Doing good, man. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a little cold, right? Little hindrance to the baseball weather, it looks like. Will you guys be practicing today, Coach?
Oh, yeah. We'll be playing this weekend, so we'll practice. We'll be playing in it, so we'll practice in it.
no wasted days.
Yeah.
There you go. That's I guess that speaks a little bit into that JYD mentality that these guys are always mentioning. What does that mean to you, Coach?
A lot, I guess. These guys know it. I think in a nutshell, it just means you mentally tough. You know, you don't feel sorry for yourself. And body language is either nothing or positive. That's probably a quick synopsis of JYD. But we could talk about that forever. One thing I do try to say, we used to talk about it more, but the JYD mentality. But I started thinking, if you got to talk about it so much, you're not JYD. So there's that too.
Amen. Well, again, thanks for being with us. We have a bunch of questions lined up. I know you've got limited time, so I want to make sure and get into it. And I think the biggest thing that folks would like to hear about right now is just a little bit about who you are, what your history is, your journey as a player and as a coach, and I think just giving us a little perspective on kind of what's gotten you to where you are today.
Well, I'm getting older. Every time I look in the mirror, I see an old man. But I've been, I grew up in Houston, played classic kind of backstory as a kid, just played Little League baseball and high school baseball in the city of Houston. Good baseball, obviously, big school, high school baseball, Westbury High School, Alvin Community College, and Rice University. 9 years of professional baseball. Never played in the big leagues, but probably everywhere else. Up to AAA and played some winter ball down in Venezuela. So played till I was 30. Was getting married, hung it up, all the same old stuff you hear, and then started coaching. 1 year of high school baseball I coached, and then I got lucky, got a job in college. And I've been coaching college ever since. I think this is college coaching. I think this is year 17 or 18, something like that. So mostly at Rice, bounced from Rice to Missouri for 1 year, Missouri to UIW, where I hooked up with Sean, and then UIW over here to UTSA, hooked up with Garrett.
Awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of folks were excited and really impressed with what you've done with the program. I'm no expert, so I won't get into those details, but I do know that my relationship with Garrett began here at UTSA, bringing my son for lessons and for your hit nights. And I was always impressed with some of the vernacular you used, some of the perspective that you gave kids, and you talked to them almost like they were adults, but in a way that was really easy and simple to comprehend. I don't know that I ever heard you yell much besides to cheer kids on. Now, that might be different in the locker room, but are you a big fan of some of these coaches that are undressing these kids in some of these tournaments these days?
That's a tough question because I will yell, and I'll yell at kids. Ask my kids.
We have seen it happen.
It's all situationally based, I guess. At the end of the day, this might sound cliche, but it's trying to get something out of them. I hope I don't yell at them for a physical mistake. It's deeper than that. It's when they can do it.
And to add on to that, just one of the things that a lot of people just from the playing side and being around Coach Hallmark and stuff for as long as I was, what a lot of people from the outside don't see is that trust that goes into building that, right? People just see, Coach is pissed, he's yelling at you, what an asshole. And it's no, you don't understand the upliftingness, what transpired to make that happen. Right, there's a lot that goes into it, and so the guys that really get it, that play for him, understand that hey, I deserve that ass chewing, or I deserve to get yelled at for that.
Sean and I talk about it all the time. Number one, thank you for being here. Thank you for holding us to the standard that you held us to, and we said it last podcast, but the stuff that you did for me when you came over and held me accountable, and we said we were going to talk about that story, but we're gonna leave that for another day. But for us, like the biggest thing is like you grew us up. Like Sean and I talk about that all the time. Like you came in and we were both probably boys, and we had to get to a point where it's like, hey, it's time to change and like actually take yourself accountable for every single situation that they're in. And I think nowadays that's what we see so much in high school youth baseball is these kids don't hold themselves accountable. Like there is no standard nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the difference. Like that's why we pride ourselves on the stuff that we do, is because we know when you came in, like we said that last time, but it was a completely different mindset. It was a completely different look, how players responded, like the accountability and the like, hey, my job's on the line today and I've got to take this serious. So, I think that's why like we appreciate those coaches that do that. That's why we appreciate you and what you did for us. So,
well, that means a lot. That's why we do it. So that's why y'all do it.
And now getting into the coaching side of things, I told him and I told my fiance and I told my parents, I was like, man, like now everything like starts to come full circle. Right? Like it all starts to make sense, right? Like, and it is very frustrating, right? Like when kids aren't held accountable, then they come to hit, and it's like,
what are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing? Like we're not making any progress because it's like they're not taking ownership of what they need to do.
I think that kind of brings me to like my first athlete question for you. You've been in the game for a long time as a player and as a coach. I think you said 30 years. What's the biggest difference in athletes, in your opinion, since the inception of social media, whether it be prep, attitude, perspective of the game, that sort of thing?
I think the biggest difference for me is just that initial perception or breakthrough is maybe harder to it's more difficult to take place. I think the young athletes now, anywhere from maybe 12 to 18, maybe even a little older, but we'll talk about that group. They just don't know what they don't know. Right? Like all they see is social media.
Sure.
I mean, I got them at home. I got 3 at home, and they just sit there and look at the social media. And so it's so fake. It's so fake. Social media is not real. Like, you don't become a good ball player on social media, right? Like, but it's not their fault. Like, how do you learn that? You learn it through time. You learn it through experience. You learn it through being around coaches and ball players, true ball players. So it just takes time. And so I think when you come across a little bit crusty or you basically tell them that's what you're looking at's baloney, like quit, like spend your time. Anyway, it just takes a little longer to get that breakthrough where they're like, okay, I see what he's saying. Like I can't get better, here, or it's not even about they're not trying to get better there, but they're just putting value in stuff that there's no baseball value in terms of building a ball player.
Sure.
So it takes a little time to get through that, just like they kind of mentioned. And these are guys that get it. They've chosen to do this for a living, and they're really good at it because they care. At the end of the day, you got to care.
Yeah,
that's what matters.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, whether it's JYD or anything else, if a kid doesn't have the willingness or the stick-to-itiveness or the integrity or whatever term you want to use, if they don't love the game, it's probably tough to become that player that they want to be or that you want to ultimately coach and develop.
Right.
I think this is kind of like a backing question for you, but how do you think that you get buy-in from your players? Like I experienced it, but like in your own words, like this can be from a parent's perspective too, but how would you get a parent to get a kid to buy in? Because like at some point the kid's got to win himself. We all understand that, but like
for me it's success. People talk about the kids don't want it as much or they don't work as hard. Like they will though, and they do. I believe they do want it just as much, but you got to be good. You got to care about them and you got to be good. So you got to get them to get better. As soon as they start to get better, it's easy. That's what you got to get. The kids got to get better. Sure. And then it gets easier after that.
Yeah.
So you got to be good. You can't be full of shit either, right? Twitter's full of shit. Like as a coach, you can't be full of shit because then the kid doesn't get better. So now you lose them and you just complain, right? Yeah. But that initial breakthrough of getting them to listen, to get off the phone, to put the work in, which is what Garrett's saying, like, and if you know what you're talking about and they put the work in, they'll get better. And once that starts to happen, it gets easier and easier. Then it's, I think, back to what maybe you and I grew up on, where it's like, we didn't have all the options.
No.
So like going to play in the park was really cool then, as
Yeah.
opposed to playing on your phone.
Or I think I used to just hit rocks in my backyard and get in trouble and get yelled at. I think you brought up a really good point. Is the kid has to be good, and I know that as a parent, I don't want my kid to be the best, and sometimes I may put pressure on them, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But for all the little league parents, for the select ball, travel ball parents who think that their kids getting drafted that day, can you as a Division I baseball coach, can you walk around and say, you know what, I may see that kid in 7 to 10 years, or and how rare of an occasion is that?
It's rare. So mostly no. The answer mostly is no, because you can't judge, the work ethic. You can't judge what are their social lives going to be like when they're 16, 17, 18. I mean, we all know whether it's girls or alcohol, like there's so many things that can lead people the wrong way.
Life.
So mostly it's no, but what you do feel like you can see even at 9, 10, 11, 12 is just athletes. You can see people that got good feet, good hips, good eyes. So you can start to see that and you say, well, he's got a chance. You hear that a lot. He's got a chance. The other thing you can tell a little bit is just kind of what we call baseball strength. So it's a weird deal. Like Anthony Rendon was 175 pounds, but from fingertip to elbows is different, right? Like you see those guys a lot in pro ball. They're hard to find in amateur baseball, but that rare kid that there's something about is whether it's flick or strength, you don't really know, but you see some of that in kids, and you're like, wow, if he likes the game a lot, he'll be good. But there's always that qualifier that you just don't ever really know.
Sure.
What would you say, kind of, I guess from the parent side, like training as like guys are getting older, right? Like with your boys when they were coming up, like when they were younger, what was kind of the focus versus like now they're getting to that older age?
Ooh, with my boys, well, I think in any boys, I mean, I was going to say competition. Like I think they need to enjoy competition. And then if they enjoy competition, hopefully you foster that in a way that it's not just baseball, it's everything, right? Like I could be wrong, but I don't think it's bad to compete, right? Like in whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean when they don't win, they're cast into outer darkness or anything, but it's okay, I think, to get them to compete at a young age. And if they enjoy competition, but they know they can fail, again, you're on the right track.
That's personally what we've enjoyed with Garrett and Sean's program with the tribe is everything's centered around a compete period. It's everything's a competition and it's healthy. And it's funny because I've seen it in other areas where the compete program is a special part of practice and then everybody's all nervous. But if it's part of everything you do, it's so funny. The trash talk is, but it's also, you see them working with each other. So maybe I'll win it today, but I know you can win it tomorrow. I don't want you to win it tomorrow. And I think that competition, they've taken a bunch of kids who are maybe middle of the pack on a lot of teams, and the way that they're playing now and the intensity they have because of the competition is incredible. And so I think that's something that they've gotten from you. And so,
do you think that's the most frustrating part of your job? Is guys not competing?
There's no doubt. In this day and age, you get yourself in trouble when you try to get them to compete. So for sure.
I mean, that's what. Because I think you could probably attest to it. But I mean, at UIW, you didn't have the absolute best baseball players in the world. Like we talk about it all the time. There's just competitors. Like 1 through 34 that was on that roster just wanted to compete and were willing to do whatever it took to win. Yeah. And I bet at Mizzou and at Rice, you probably had better baseball players than that. And that's how we view our team. Like, we know that those guys, like all 50 of our guys that we have, they're not the best baseball players. But if we get to compete, like if we go out there and we really compete and we forget about failure, we forget about the mistakes, we get out of our own way and just compete and look to win every opportunity we get, like that's when we dominate.
Right.
And there's so many times that we played teams that are better than us that then we shy from it. It's like, how do we instill that competitive environment without taking them out of, or like almost putting them in a position where they're worried about failure? Because we got guys that are like that, right? We've pushed them so far into the competitive side where it's like, dude, you got to compete, you got to compete, you got to compete. And it's like we're just repeating ourselves.
Right.
And so we get to the point where it's just like this guy's now like fearful of failure because we put him in so many positions to compete.
Yeah,
right?
that's hard. I don't know that there's an answer. I think you coach the individual, right? Like one kid may do okay with the over the top competition, right? Like all the time. And then there are kids, if you see some improvement, like in other words, they initially don't, it's foreign to them. They don't get it at home. That's the kid that at some point you might have to pull back and give him some praise despite him not being very talented or not loving to compete as much as you want him to compete. Coaching the individual is critical. And again, that's where coaches have to be good. There's a lot of, people think coaching's easy. And I think some coaches do choose this line of work because you can be lazy and get away with it. And at the end of the day, you got to be good. It doesn't matter what you do for a living. You got to be good. So you got to evaluate the individual. It's not easy. I mean, I say it like it's easy, right? But like I fail it all the time. Like I'm too hard on a guy. I'm not hard enough on a guy. Like that's what assistant coaches are wonderful for that, right? So you get more opinions. But it's definitely a challenge finding the right mix.
Sometimes we find ourselves like trying to create some buy-in from guys talking about stuff like completely outside of baseball. I look over there in the other cage the other day, and he's over there talking to someone about like video games or like whatever.
I hate video games.
It's just like
I told him that day one. I said, dude, like there's gonna be guys that we come across, especially it's more prevalent, I think, in what we do. Like we just come across guys that don't love the game as much. So this is just what it is. But I told him, I said, you gotta get to the heart of the kid, because if you get to the heart of the kid, like you've won. And that kid may not end up being Derek Jeter, but like he's gonna reach his potential. Right. If you reach him in a way that like he thinks that you care about him, I think like that was exactly what we were talking about a second ago. That's what you do a great job of, and Coach Aguirre, Coach Butler, like all those guys do a great job of. Is like they give a shit about the kid, and when you give a shit, like that's when even if you get your ass chewed, even if you get screamed up and down, like we know that it's important, and there's a reason why that's there, but.
That's where I think the improvement comes. The kids that, initially most kids I don't think love it, right? Like, but they might not love it as much as you or me, but if they improve at the game of baseball, they'll certainly like it more, right? So that's where, again, competent coaches help, which you guys are. So that's why y'all see the retention in your program and things like that. But, getting them to improve and then finding ways to connect are all avenues to success.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean that's a strong correlation to love. Is it does it feel good? Right? Love is rarely associated with hurt or disappointment. Right? You want it to go the other way. Yeah. A question that I think a lot of folks would like to see answered: how involved are parents at this level? Are you still getting calls? Are you? Is Johnny not playing? And I'll tell you why. Because a buddy of mine coached Tony Jeffrey, who's been on the podcast before at UT. He was a GA at UT, coached here, coached at Houston, and he was a position coach, and said he'd still get calls like, "Well, we went there, we could have went anywhere." And or do you deal with that still, and does it affect?
I deal with it, but not as much as I'm sure these guys deal with it. Like high school coaches deal with it a ton. Yeah. A lot of my friends coaching in high school, we do deal with it. Honestly, I try to be pretty curt and upfront right away. Like I'm not going to have this conversation. I want to have good relationships with the parents, right? Like I want the parents involved. I want the parents to feel like at practice they can come say hello, and certainly if we're not right in the moment practicing, that I'll have a chat them up. But I don't want the parents to feel like they can call me and talk about playing time or even why these are grown-ups, right? I mean, these guys could go off and fight in a war. Like I can talk to them about that, and they can choose whether or not to talk to mom and dad. That's kind of the way I present it to the parents. So I don't get a lot of them because I try to cut it off pretty quick if it's playing time. But when I tell people, even my wife, that so-and-so called today, people are still flabbergasted. Like, that happens? It's like, yeah, it still happens.
We get blown away that it happens too. I mean, we try to tell those guys day one, like, I don't want to hear from your parents, bud. Like, you come talk to me, and if we didn't have we're in a different line of work. So, like, we have to appease the parents. Like, they're paying to play. But, like, I want the kid to come talk to me.
Right.
Be a grown-up, dude. Like, grow up. You're going to have to do it in 10 years anyway.
If you want Gatorade, get it beforehand. Don't get it over that.
I will say it. with me, most of the time, the kid don't know the parents are even calling. The parents usually start the conversation off like, well, don't tell Johnny I'm calling. And I'm like, well, you don't want me to tell him don't call. Like, that's a good way. It's a good way to
I'm going to put you on the spot in practice, son.
Yeah.
So we've talked several times throughout this podcast. You talked about love of the game and pressure and whatnot. And I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine, Joe Lopez. His son plays in the Lone Star organization, and I guess Buddy Meyer from St. Mary's, his boy plays, I think, the same age group. And he mentioned they were having a conversation. And last pod, you said jokingly that travel ball, select ball's killing the game a little bit.
Yeah.
But Coach, for you, is travel baseball really hindering the development of players? And the context that Joe provided was, you got Dominican, Puerto Rican, Latin American players, Cameroonian players, whatever, who aren't on travel teams, right? Maybe don't have equipment, don't have uniforms. They're just playing for the love of the game, either as a way out of poverty or just because they love it,
Right.
and are having high rates of success per capita, right, out of those countries. Is the travel select baseball putting too much pressure on some of these athletes? I heard you say something kind of contrary to that, or is it the rogue organizations that are hurting, or is it not an issue at all?
I think you can always find it to be an issue if you wanted to hunt it. At the end of the day, I think travel ball or select baseball in general is a good thing. I really do, because it's more baseball, which I love. Right? Like, you're talking to a baseball coach. That's the sheer positive of it. Like, when I was a kid, I'd have given anything to play more games. But there's a flip side to every coin, right? Like, more games seems like a good thing, but now, if you were to ask me when a player gets to you, does the win and the loss matter as much as like when I was a kid? I'd say no, right? Because there were less wins and losses. Like, so you value them more. It's like anything. It's a supply and demand. Like, there's so many games, the win and the loss is a little less important to them. Which, as a coach, a college coach that makes my living on wins and losses, that matters, right? Like, but in terms of touching the baseball and like, when I use the word talent, don't think God-given talent. Think of like skill development, I guess. Like, there's a lot of skill. I think the skill development present day is beyond what it was when I was a kid. And that's a direct correlation to the amount of time they play, the quality of coaches they get at a young age. Like, so there's benefits to it, but kids throw harder now. It's crazy to me how hard they throw now, right? Like, and that comes from work. The kids put in the work. Kids will work. If you point them in the right direction, you give them good coaching, like, they'll work, which is the same as before. I'm not sure kids don't work harder now, but there's just so much fluff, like BS out there, that sometimes they work on something that they don't need to work on, right? Or you already asked about it, but then you add this social media element to the travel ball, and it's like these rankings. It's like, come on, I mean, it doesn't matter. And I say all this in the back of my mind. I hear this voice like, well, your kids are the work. Like, my kids are at home. They're talking about rankings tonight. Put the freaking thing away. Like, nobody cares. Go win, right? They're a little more into stats because it's all readily available. Like, I got a son, high school pitcher, and he's all worried about the velocity number. And I'm like, did you win? Like, let's talk about winning and losing. Like, that's what I think. When there weren't as many games, kids wanted to win the tournament more or whatever. Like, it's a huge, big deal to win. Where now winning is a backseat to how hard you throw and where you're ranked and where your team's ranked and some of these other things.
Sure. And I think there's something to be said about guys like a Cooper Cup who just wins everywhere. Football, different, but a guy who just wins everywhere he goes. He may not be the flashiest. He's obviously the best now, but they're just working hard, doing their job, bringing the team up, having some of that, so some of those intangibles, maybe a glue guy type deal. Mm-hmm. Do you reserve a couple of spots on your team for the guy that's maybe not the God-given talent and a glue guy, or
we don't really set out that way, but it tends to happen that way. So at the end, at the end of the season, obviously we turn the page to the next season, and most seasons we are a little over roster-wise, where we're going to have to make some cuts, and you just play it out, right? You use the whole fall to really play it out. So we don't necessarily say like we're looking for these glue guys or maybe a less talented junkyard dog type player, but they make themselves available and they tend to stick around, just kind of organically, which is the best way, right? And oftentimes comes from guys who've been in the program that they just start to get it a little bit, right? And they make a jump in that area, right? Their talent is their talent. But they start to understand the game a little bit and understand where they can make a little nudge here and there. Like clearly Cooper Kupp's a wonderful example, because if you charted him or scouted him, even now, if he just blindly went to a random, I don't know football, but I'm sure if he went to a combine, he wouldn't test out on some of that stuff, right? And if somehow you could disguise him, and then see where they rank him, and then all of a sudden it's Cooper Kupp, people would be like, oops. Right? So he's, it's the classic saying, you can't measure some of that.
Awesome. Well, we got just a little bit of time left here. Wanted to see if you had some stories to share or some perspective on Garrett and Sean and your, when you had them in your program, and how you've seen them develop over the last few years.
Well, I do think they mentioned it earlier. I probably wouldn't have chosen these words, but they chosen. I do think they've grown up into be great men. Garrett, I got to know Garrett when I got to UTSA, and I actually offered him. He was with us coaching as a student coach, and I tried to get him to take a more full-time job with us, but he's making too much money. And I don't blame him, honestly. Like, we sat down and really I opened up, basically tried to give him a very realistic picture of what college coaching is about, because everybody says they want to coach, and then the next thing they say is they want to coach in college. So I tried to just really lay it out for him, because it's not quite what it's always cracked up to be, although I do love it. And I'm not going to say I knew Garrett wonderfully, but I think from that conversation was probably 18 months into knowing you. And then it's probably been another couple years since that conversation. But certainly prior to that 18-month of that conversation, I would have thought of Garrett much like a player, which means as a kid. And then just the questions he was asking. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I probably wouldn't have had quite such an adult conversation with him. But over that 18 months, I could tell by the questions he was asking me, just about coaching. Not necessarily about career choice, but just about coaching and the path of him trying to get players to improve. I could tell it was just more grown-up stuff that he was thinking about. So anyway, we had two long conversations just about life and careers and goods and bads, and I'm not surprised that the tribe has been successful and will continue to be successful with him as kind of the point man. So I wish him the best. He's done great. Sure. Sean, I've known of Sean way back from when he was playing for the 12 as a player, and I watched him close at Rice, because Sean will understand this. He wasn't quite talented enough to be what we were recruiting at that time at Rice, but he always fit that mold of what you hit on, and we talked about a little bit of the overachiever, the JYD. And I don't think we ever offered you, did we? Coming out of high school?
No.
We got
right on the verge.
Yeah, we had conversations.
On the verge.
Yeah, talked a lot about him. But so I feel like I've known Sean a long time. But I didn't, just because I saw him play so much and knew him as a player really well. But anyway, I got lucky. I left Rice, went to Missouri, circled back to UIW where he was already there. Coach Aguayo recruited him there, and so I was lucky enough to get to coach him. He's exactly what you want to coach. If anything, he worked too hard. You'd have to kick him out of the cage. And
a lot of those nights.
All that stuff, and you'd have to tell him, dude, 0 for 7's like happened, bro. Like go away.
Sean would be on his freaking hands and knees trying to figure it out in the cage.
Yeah, and he was a very good player. So my first year with him, solid player, and then my second year with him, he was unbelievably good player. Batted lead off and everything you wanted. I mean, he could walk, he could hit a homer, he could take, hit 3 singles. Very good defender, versatile. He's just what you want as a player. He played multiple positions. We tried to switch him to second base. He was a catcher outfielder mostly. We actually tried to get him to play second base, which that was an adventure. I could tell some stories there.
3 weeks, I think it was.
He would end up in areas on the field where you'd be like, how did you end up? I mean, I wasn't laughing at the time. Like on cuts and relays, we'd be like, how the F is he there? you know. But anyway, second base didn't work, but he's a terrific terrific outfielder, solid catcher, and really just in terms of, you know, what any coach wants is getting the most out of his players. That's what you want to do. That's what I always try to quantify my job as, is the wins and losses are important, right? And we're judged by that, by bosses and other people, and that's great. But really, I judge myself and I judge other coaches on, do you get the most out of your players, player by player, right? You're not going to get the most out of every one, but generally speaking, do you? And Sean made that easy. He certainly got, and as a player, that's what you should be asking yourself, is am I getting the most out of whatever God gave me? And these guys can definitely say they did. And I was longer with Sean, so I can absolutely, he got more out of his ability than probably he should have.
That's awesome. No, as a parent of a kid these guys coach, I can agree with you. They are wise beyond their years. They ask questions about life and topics that are beyond baseball that are impressive to me. Not that I'm somebody to impress, but I've been around some impressive people, and these guys are on their way. So I
think the biggest thing that I want to say before we go, like, this is to the parents and then also to any kid that listens, is like, you've got to take pride in what environment you surround yourself in. Like, that's got to be the most important thing, and that's why, like, me and Sean hold ourselves to that standard. Is like, man, the environment is going to breed, and we say it all the time. The environment breeds the success. The environment breeds the competitor, and like, as a player, if you're a guy that ends up becoming a college baseball player, a guy that is getting recruited, like, this is what you're looking for. This is what you're looking for in a program. This is what parents should be looking for when they're going and trying out for a new team. Like, it's going to be what is make or break for your kid at the end of the day. As a kid coming out of high school, like, look into the coach and figure out, like, is this guy going to get the most out of me? And if any of our guys ever had the opportunity to go play for Coach Hallmark, UTSA, wherever that is, like, at the end of the day, like, I'm sending them and telling them, like, you have no other choice. Like, I'm not going to let you, because we know that at the end of the day, like, he's going to get the most out of them. And that's what we try to do to our guys every single day. So to the parents, to the kids, like, do your homework and find out what is that environment like, and is it going to be an environment that's going to breed my son as a winner and breed him into somebody that after baseball, he's going to win in anything that he does. Like, that's what we do every single day.
And that's the goal, right? That's why everyone wants to play, right?
Yeah.
Is to have that in your back pocket, so whenever, you know, at some point baseball is going to end for all of us, whether we play in the big leagues or not, and we want the time that we have to play to be able to propel us to be successful in anything that we do.
100%.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Coach. Good luck to you in your season.
Thanks,
and hopefully we talk to you again sometime.
You got
Absolutely.
it. Yep.